Does the United States' latest announcement of export controls signal increasing desperation to hold on to its science and technology hegemony? Why have unionized railroad workers in the US rejected a new contract deal brokered by the White House? And on the day when the FIFA Under-17 Women's World Cup gets underway in India, what is the legacy of these showcase events for the sport in the global south? Our guest today will take on all these questions and more on this latest episode of the Daily Debrief, coming to you from the People's Dispatch studios in New Delhi with me, Siddhantani. First up, US chip export controls announced by the Joe Biden administration in the United States of America last week, a set of sweeping unilateral controls on exports of semiconductor chips to China. The measures are the most serious shift in US policy in regard to shipping technology to China since the 1990s and could set the Chinese chip industry back several years, if not more, in the short term, but also thereby impacting companies in the semiconductor industry both in the US and its allied countries. It's another example of the US amping up its so-called trade war with China in increasingly desperate attempts to undermine multilateralism and hold on to a global hegemony which is under threat on multiple fronts. Bapa Sinha is Daily Debrief's one-stop shop for all things technology related and is in studio after a significant break. Bapa, first of all, welcome back to the studio. And thanks for giving us your time today. What do the controls say, or the set of export controls that were published last week? What do they tell us? What are the companies that will fall under its purview, etc.?
So basically, they have taken the restrictions on chips and on semiconductors and equipment which manufacture chips, which were put in place by the Trump administration. They have significantly escalated that now, right? So this is a major escalation by the Biden administration, and it impacts export of high-end semiconductors to China, and like chips from AI to chips which go into supercomputers. So companies like NVIDIA and AMD are affected. It also restricts export of equipment which is used to make chips, right? So a company like ASML comes to mind, which has the latest equipment which make these very high-end chips, right? Chips which are below 7 nanometer and less. And the third thing it has done is it has significantly expanded what is called the unverified list. So unverified list is kind of this preliminary list of where companies go into, and if the US government is not satisfied with their explanations, they move to the entity list, which then means that those companies get banned from any trading, right? Like, for example, Huawei is on that list. So they have put a company like YMTC, which is which makes memory chips, into that list, and they've put some 30 other companies in that. So this is a significant escalation of the existing policies of the US government.
Right. What is, in your assessment, the thought process behind this escalation at this time?
So see, the US is now waging an outright trade and economic war with China, right? So they feel that China is surpassing the US in many of the high-tech areas, right? And semiconductor, like our modern society is kind of centered around chips and semiconductors, right? It goes into all kinds of equipment from cell phones, high-end computers, into pretty much any equipment you can think of, right? Automobiles, military equipment. And as China becomes more and more competitive with the US is feeling threatened that this historical edge it has over the world in high technology, that is now getting eroded. And China will, if left unchecked, will surpass the US, and then US will be in serious trouble in maintaining its global hegemony. And so this is an effort to retard China's growth. I mean, I think that's straightforward.
Straightforward. It will, of course, have a long-term impact that will, significantly hit the US economy as well, along with, of course, its allies. And so far, several of the US allies, or none of the US allies, have really come forward and said that they will be adopting these export controls either. So that's something that's still being worked out, I guess. What will that long-term impact be? Of course, in the short run, maybe the Chinese chip industry will be hit the hardest.
Right. See, so what is true currently is that China is behind the rest of the world in, like, at least the leading companies in the world in semiconductors, right? So China is at a disadvantage in semiconductors currently, and so these restrictions seek to kind of seal that in so that China is not able to leapfrog. And so clearly it, in the short term, affects China and Chinese companies. But in the long term, this may boomerang on US and its allies, right? And you can already start seeing that US allies like South Korea, Japan, Taiwan, which are kind of big players in this space, they are dragging their foot. And the reason they are dragging their foot is that China today accounts for Chinese import of semiconductors account for 30% of all semiconductors that is produced globally.
Right.
So this is like huge amount of revenues we are talking about, and these countries and their companies are worried about the impact it will have on their companies if you stop this trade flow between China and these countries. So that's why the allies are dragging their foot. The US companies themselves will also be impacted, right? Because again, if you are cutting down 30% of the market and of your revenues, that is 30% less revenues for these companies. And semiconductors, as you know, is a very, very capital intensive area, because it's an area where because you're on the cutting edge of technology, it requires a lot of R&D investments to come up with new products. And the other problem with semiconductors is that when you come up with a product, it gets obsolete very soon, right? One generation of these chips lasts like between 3 to 5 years, right? And then you're obsolete. And so you have to constantly invest on R&D to come up with the next generation of products. And if you reduce the revenues by 30%, that's 30% less capital you have to invest in R&D to keep ahead. And so you are already seeing this effect on these leading US semiconductor companies like NVIDIA, AMD, Intel, ASML, which is not an American company, but it's a Dutch company. And you are seeing that their stock prices have collapsed in the last few months, right, by like as much as 50% because of these US policies. So it's going to impact American competitiveness itself in the long run.
All right. Thanks very much for that perspective, and also simplifying it so that I guess those of us who are not that clued in can also pretty much figure out what is going on. Thanks again, Baba. Our next story is also from the United States, where the country's third largest railroad union, the Brotherhood of Maintenance of Way Employees Division, rejected a deal with employers this week on the 10th of October, saying that key issues related to paid time off from work remain unaddressed. The rejection of the deal has renewed the possibility of industrial action by union members that would have a massive effect on an already beleaguered economy. Both sides will, however, return to the bargaining table before that happens. Union President Tony Cardwell said that the railroads had not done enough to address the lack of paid time, and this particularly applies to paid sick leave and other working conditions, of course, after major railroads in the US have eliminated nearly a third of all jobs over the past 6 years. US President Joe Biden pressured railroads as well as unions to reach a deal last month ahead of a mid-September deadline for a strike. The White House subsequently brokered the deal offered to the unions. Anish joins us now. He's been covering the story and has all the details. Anish, welcome back to the show. We're talking, of course, about this major potential action that railroad workers might undertake or might be forced to undertake. First of all, negotiations have been on for a while, and the highest levels of US government have been involved in those negotiations, trying to broker a deal before things come to a real head. What were the sticking points? Why did eventually members of this union vote quite overwhelmingly sort of to reject the deal?
Yes. So while there is definitely a split within the Teamsters union that has voted against the deal, but the main contention is something that is shared by unions in general. We have seen this being talked about over reports that we have read, that unions are, and many of the workers are still quite concerned about the sick time and paid leaves that workers are being given. The condition of work, their living standard of work, and the kind of environment that they're working in matter a lot, because railroad workers in general, yeah, it's not just in the United States, we see that around the world. They do not get this, they do not have the same kind of shifts that usual workers have. They sometimes have to work long hours consecutively, so resting periods, sick leaves, paid leaves, and all of that matters a lot. And when that is not taken into account, it definitely affects the quality of lives that they have, the standard of living, and the condition that they're working in obviously is affected. Especially considering the fact that over the last year or so, railroad companies have cut down on worker capacity by nearly one third. It is actually it actually shows that there is more stress, more pressure, more work being dumped on the existing set of workers, especially maintenance workers and the allied people who keep up the industry as such. So this is definitely at the center of the contention right now. A lot of other demands have been taken into consideration in the agreement, but definitely the Biden administration's suggestion, because we have to remember that the arbitration is happening in a very mediated form, right? So the Biden administration suggestion is that they hold individual negotiations with each of the companies for sick leaves and paid time offs and all of that, rather than have a general agreement on that. So that is something that is not acceptable. And obviously, because one union, not just one of the unions, but the fact that it is one of the largest unions of maintenance workers in the railways sector in the United States, says that this contention is going to be far bigger in the coming years.
So, in that context, what is the likelihood of the railway companies coming to terms or agreeing to terms, or will the unions be forced into taking some sort of industrial action?
In this case, the compromise really has to come from the federal administration, because the federal administration is now a party to the negotiation. It is an emergency board of arbitrators that is now steering the entire negotiations between the union and the employers. So obviously, employers will have to make concessions if things have to move forward, but it is something that the government has to interfere in, because obviously many of the currently agreed upon the concessions that the employers made in the agreement is something that only happened because there was a direct intervention from the Biden administration. So definitely, even in this case, there needs to be a direct intervention. It is significant primarily not just because it is just one of the larger unions that is backing out of the deal or opposing the deal, but the fact that you need consent from all 12 of the unions currently in negotiation in the process right now. And so, if one of them backs out, if it's not unanimous, it's definitely going to put the deal in, put a spanner in the entire process. So that is something that the Biden administration wants to avoid, because there is an against vote which has gone through successfully after 4 unions have voted in favor. This shows that there needs to be a renegotiation. Obviously, we do not see strike happening right now because the unions have agreed to not have their agreed upon strike until the Congress convenes in November. So the votes will also take place. There are 7 more unions that need to vote on the matter. So we need to look at how they are going to vote, how their members are going to take the deal. And obviously that will affect the further negotiations.
Thanks very much for that update and for tracking that story for us, Anish. Right, and finally, today, that's the 11th of October, is the day the FIFA Under-17 World Cup gets underway in India. This is, of course, the Under-17 World Cup for women, or girls as they are. And it's a really important tournament because it focuses not on the top or the elite football stars of the world, those who earn millions every week and are frequently seen on television screens across the planet, but on the future of football, particularly as FIFA says many times, the future of football that is going to be determined very much by women who play the sport as well as women who watch the sport and consume it in different ways. We have recently in India, Fatma Samoura, the first woman Secretary General of FIFA, is in town. And she was talking about the legacy of this project and how it will impact hundreds of thousands of girls, not just in India, but wherever the tournament has an impact. And this is particularly important in the case of the Global South, where giving girls the opportunity to play is fundamentally as important as any other lasting impact of a showcase tournament such as this. Talking more on this subject will be Sharda Ogra, who joined me earlier via video conference. She's a senior journalist, has been covering the sport and other sports in India for several decades. Sharda, big day for, of course, for Indian football because a new chapter. I know we say this and it's a cliche, but this time genuinely a new chapter in India's football history is opening up. At least the first ever women's team from this country will participate at a FIFA World Cup finals tournament. And of course for several other nations as well, small countries who have fledgling programs for women in the sport, getting a chance to showcase some of their best young talent. What are the highlights for you that you're looking forward to as this couple of weeks or more, 20 days or so of football fun gets underway? And I say fun because I suppose not as much at stake in the commercial and that kind of sense as there is from a senior World Cup, right? The focus much more on these young players, their raw, sometimes sheer talent, and look at what the future of football might be like.
Yeah, Siddhant, it's a really exciting tournament. The idea itself just strikes you as something that has been produced, given the fact that there's been such a upsurge in women's, or let's say under 17s football in schools, that girls are taking part in the competition. And I think we'll see that there is much more following of the women's under 17 football than we imagine, because you have considerably large number of schools in India that play girls schools that play football, and to see these are the best players in the world that will be there. I mean, today I just know there's Brazil versus Morocco, and the moment you say Brazil and you say football, it's a completely different kind of a story, even though Brazil's success at the women's football level is not like that of the US, which is playing against the Indians today. And of course, being journalists, there are many questions that are going to come out of out of this event as to what is the next step, or is it just the bread and circus thing? तो आपने फिर एक और circus कर दिया for the public to say that we've done a big event, but honestly, just great fun to have so many young women be playing and being on the big stage from all around the world.
How do you view the legacy of a tournament such as this, and how important is it to build, rather than what FIFA's approach might be of trickle down of having a World Cup and therefore getting people interested? Looking at it from a bottom-up perspective, what kind of impact will it have at the grassroots level?
Siddhant, we should not be getting into trickle down sort of philosophies at this point, because we've seen how they work. We had a men's under 17 football World Cup as well, which was a very well. It was a massive event, and I remember covering it as a reporter, and I enjoyed it tremendously. And what you saw was that there were opportunities available for the boys that were playing in that event, and that's a lot of them have come through, and you'll see them playing in I-League or in ISL or whatever. What you want here for the women players, for the under 17 girls here, is those opportunities of that kind. Maybe not, maybe they don't exist in that number that are there for the men, which is not a fantastic number. We're not saying that Indian club football or grassroots football is best served by the powers that be, but at least something of the kind that will show them that there is more to, you can take this sport and you can run with it as a career. I mean, I don't think that why is it? I don't think that the girls need to just be semi-pros at some point. That the
Right.
coach of the Brazilian team, of the US team that's playing India today is the Barcelona from the Barcelona women's football program. So we need to have that. We need to see that trickle down effect that everybody says spreading across the entire ecosystem of Indian football, of the clubs that are there. How many clubs are going to put up women's teams? Why aren't they putting up women's teams? So all these things, maybe this tournament will engineer those conversations.
All right. Thanks so much for your time, Sharda, and for always sort of showing up for these bits on Daily Debrief. It's always great to have all of your insights and your experience to share with our audience. That's all we have on this episode of the Daily Debrief. You can watch our continuing coverage, of course, of that FIFA Under-17 Women's World Cup on People's Dispatch, as well as our sister channel NewsClick, as the tournament continues, and it goes on till the 31st of October this year. So log in to newsclick.in as well as peoplesdispatch.org for updates and details on that tournament, as well as all of the other work we do. And of course, don't forget to follow us on the social media platform of your choice. We'll be back with another episode of the Daily Debrief, same time, same place tomorrow. Until then, stay safe. Goodbye.